He's a striker. The voice was calm, almost bored. Put him on the ground, and the whole myth falls apart. The man who said it wasn't small. He wasn't angry. He wasn't posturing for a crowd. He was Gene LeBel, and he didn't need to posture for anyone. Two-time United States national judo champion, a decorated professional wrestler, a man who had choked out police officers during live demonstrations just to prove a point. The fighters in Los Angeles didn't call him dangerous behind his back. They called him dangerous to his face, because that was the only honest thing to do. And right now, he was standing in the middle of a private gym in Culver City, California, arms folded across his chest, looking at a man who weighed roughly 130 pounds soaking wet. Bruce Lee, who said absolutely nothing. The year was 1968. Martial arts in America was splitting in two. On one side, you had the strikers, the karate men, the kung fu practitioners, the men who believed that speed and distance were everything. On the other, you had the grapplers, the wrestlers, the judokas, the men who believed that the moment you close that distance and get your hands on a man's collar, the fight is already over. And the question that everyone in that room was quietly asking, the question that had been building for months in gyms and training halls across Los Angeles, was simple. What happens when those two worlds collide? The gym smelled like iron and old canvas. It wasn't a movie set. There were no cameras, no lights, no audience beyond a tight circle of maybe 11 fighters and coaches who had been quietly invited. Word had spread through the right channels. A session. A conversation. Something that was never supposed to become a legend. Gene LeBel had respect for Bruce Lee, let that be clear. He had seen him move. He had watched Bruce's hands blur through combinations that the human eye genuinely struggled to track. He had seen men twice Bruce's size flinch before the blow even landed, because the speed alone felt like a violation of the laws of physics. But respect and certainty are two different things. And LeBel was certain about one thing. The ground was the great equalizer. It had always been. You could be the fastest man alive on your feet, and the moment a trained grappler got his hands around your waist, the moment your back touched the mat, all of that speed became irrelevant. Your footwork meant nothing. Your distance management meant nothing. You were in someone else's world, and in that world, technique and leverage ruled everything. He hadn't come to embarrass Bruce Lee. He had come to ask a question. Can you survive down there? Bruce had been watching him the entire time LeBel was speaking. Not defensively, not with calculation, just watching, the way a man watches weather moving across a mountain, patient, certain of something that hasn't arrived yet. The men in the room shifted. Someone coughed. The space between the two men felt smaller than it was. One of the coaches, a wrestling instructor named Rudy, a thick man with a permanently swollen ear who had trained collegiate champions, leaned toward the fighter next to him and muttered something under his breath. The fighter nodded. They had both seen what happens when a grappler gets his hands on a striking artist. It never ended well for the striker. Bruce finally spoke. His voice didn't rise to fill the room. It never did. Show me what you mean. 3 words. Simple as a door being opened. LeBel unfolded his arms. Here is what most people don't understand about Bruce Lee in 1968. They know the films. They know the 1-inch punch. They know the image, the shirtless fury, the nunchaku, the scream that stops time. What they don't know is what was happening inside his mind during the years before Enter the Dragon made him immortal. Bruce Lee was not resting on his reputation. He was hunting. Every fighter he respected, he studied. Every gap he found in himself, he attacked with the same obsessive intensity he brought to everything else. He had been watching Western boxing for years, breaking it down frame by frame. He had trained with wrestlers. He had spent hours, not minutes, hours on the ground, studying what happened to a striker when someone took the fight to the mat. He had done this quietly. He had done this privately. Because Bruce Lee understood something that most people in that gym did not. The moment you show your hand, you lose leverage. The moment someone knows you can grapple, they adjust. They come at you differently. They plan for it. So he had said nothing. For years he had said nothing.
And LaBelle, brilliant, experienced, dangerous LaBelle, had built an assumption out of that silence. That was the mistake. They cleared the center of the gym. No rules were stated because none needed to be. This wasn't a competition, it was a conversation. But everyone in that room understood what was actually happening. When a man of LaBelle's caliber initiates this kind of exchange, there is only real one question being answered. Who are you really when the conditions aren't favorable? LaBelle moved forward. He was not rushing, he was a professional, he knew better than to rush. He settled into a low, controlled stance, weight forward, hands ready, eyes locked on Bruce's center of gravity. This is how he had taken down hundreds of men. Watch the hips. Move when the hips move. Never let the hands distract you. Bruce's feet shifted. Barely, almost imperceptibly. But LaBelle noticed because LaBelle noticed everything. Bruce had adjusted his weight without telegraphing the direction. The stance was different from what LaBelle expected. Not a karate stance, not a kung fu stance. Something lower, something that cut the distance differently. LaBelle's eyes narrowed. Interesting. The room had gone completely still. 11 men holding breath they didn't know they were holding. And then LaBelle moved.
What happened in the next 4 seconds shocked everyone in that room. Not because of what Bruce Lee did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't run. He didn't back away. He didn't try to create distance. Didn't reach for a kick to keep the grappler at range. Didn't do any of the things a traditional striker would do when a man of LaBelle's caliber began closing that gap. He went toward him. A step and a half, just inside the danger zone, just inside the space where grapplers feel comfortable, where they expect fear and find it, where the geometry of the room always tilts in their favor. Bruce went there voluntarily. LaBelle's hands shot forward, the grip, the signature entry, powerful, technical, a move that had ended 1,000 sessions just like this one. His left hand found Bruce's right wrist, and the leverage began. Bruce redirected. Not blocked, redirected. The angle shifted in a way that made at least 2 men in the room audibly inhale, because what Bruce did wasn't defensive, it wasn't reactive, it felt, and this is the word several witnesses would use later, decades later, when they finally allowed themselves to talk about that afternoon. It felt anticipated, like he had already been there, like he had already lived this moment before it happened. LaBelle adjusted. A different grip, lower, going for the waist. Bruce moved with him. They went to the ground. Rudy, the wrestling coach, would tell a friend about this years later. He would choose his words carefully, the way men do when they're describing something they're not sure they fully understood even while they were watching it. He wasn't fighting the ground, Rudy would say. Most strikers fight the ground. They hate it down there. You can feel the panic in them the moment they go horizontal. Lee didn't panic. He didn't even look uncomfortable. It was like he had a map of a place everyone else thought was enemy territory. He would pause. And then I realized he'd been there before. He'd been training there, quietly, privately, for years. He just hadn't told anyone. On the mat, the struggle continued. LaBelle was not a man who gave up position easily. He was pressure and patience and leverage all working together with the efficiency of a machine that had been refined over 2 decades of competition. But Bruce Lee was not where he was supposed to be. He kept not being where he was supposed to be, and every time LaBelle adjusted, every time he shifted his weight to compensate, Bruce was already somewhere else, not scrambling, not escaping in panic, but moving with intention, like water finding the one path a stone cannot block. 20 seconds in, 30. LaBelle's breathing changed. And that was the moment the room understood something was wrong.
Or, rather, something had never been what they thought it was.
LaBelle's breathing changed. That was the tell. Every man in that room recognized it, because every man in that room had fought long enough to know what it meant when a grappler's breath shifted from controlled rhythm to something slightly faster, slightly more effortful. It wasn't panic. Gene LaBelle didn't panic. He hadn't panicked in 20 years of competition, and he wasn't going to start now in a gym in Culver City on a Tuesday afternoon. But something was costing him energy that shouldn't have been costing him energy. And that, in the language of mat fighting, said everything. Bruce was underneath him. That part was true. LaBelle had the positional advantage on paper. Weight on top, chest to chest, the classic dominant position that every wrestling coach in America teaches on day one, because it works, because it has always worked, because gravity is not a philosophy, it is a fact. Except Bruce's hips were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of poor technique, wrong in the sense that they were not where LaBelle's body expected them to be. Every adjustment LaBelle made, shifting his weight left to block an escape, driving his shoulder to kill the space, Bruce's hips moved in a direction that subtly, infuriatingly undid the adjustment before it could be completed. It was like trying to pin a shadow. Not because Bruce was escaping. He wasn't escaping. He was doing something far more unsettling. He was waiting. Rudy saw it from the side. He saw what no one else caught because he was standing at the right angle, and decades later he would describe this specific moment with a kind of reverence that men usually reserve for things they have witnessed in nature, storms, or the exact second a fire decides to move. Bruce Lee, on his back, underneath one of the most decorated grapplers in North America, looked relaxed. Not faking it, not performing it, actually relaxed. His jaw was loose, his hands were open, his eyes were fixed on LaBelle's shoulder, not his face, not his hands, but his shoulder, because the shoulder tells you everything a second before the body commits. He was reading him. He had been reading him the whole time. 45 seconds. LaBelle went for the choke. It was the move, the signature, the one that had put police officers to sleep during demonstrations, the one that separated the casual grappler from the genuinely dangerous. The arm came across, angled for the neck, and the setup was clean, exactly what you do when a man's hips keep escaping your weight control. You stop fighting the hips, you go for the neck. The arm moved. Bruce moved first, not after, first, as if the decision to choke had created a pressure wave that Bruce had detected before LaBelle's muscles had finished receiving the signal from his brain. The frame shifted, two bodies adjusting in opposite directions at the same moment, and suddenly the geometry of the position had changed in a way that made the choke not dangerous, but awkward, bent at an angle that required a reset. LaBelle reset, his breath faster now. Bruce said nothing. What happened in the next 10 seconds was witnessed by 11 people and has never been captured on film. The footage was never released because there was no footage. No one brought a camera. No one expected the session to become what it became. That was the nature of these private moments in 1968. They happened in rooms with no witnesses beyond the men already inside them, and the truth of what occurred lived and died in the memories of those present. But the memories are specific, and they agree. LaBelle attempted a second entry, a leg hook, lower, bypassing the hip control problem entirely. Sound technique, creative adjustment, the kind of move that reflects genuine mastery, not just brute insistence. Bruce caught the leg. Not grabbed, caught. The distinction matters. Grabbing implies reaction. Catching implies anticipation. His hand was already moving to the exact position where the leg was going to be, and it arrived there at the same moment the leg did.
which meant either Bruce Lee had the reflexes of something that had not evolved from a human bloodline, or he had studied this exact sequence so many times at such depth that his body had become a map of it. Both things might have been true. The session stopped. Not because someone called it, not because anyone was hurt. It stopped because LaBelle sat back. He sat back, looked at the man on the ground in front of him, and was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that no one in that room expected. He laughed.
Not a mocking laugh, not embarrassed, not the nervous release of a man who needs to save face. Jean LaBelle laughed the way men laugh when they have discovered something genuinely delightful, when the world has revealed itself to be larger and more interesting than they previously believed. He reached out a hand. Bruce took it. They sat up together. "Where did you learn that?" LaBelle said. Bruce looked at him. "The same place you learned yours." LaBelle tilted his head slightly, waiting. "From the people who wanted to beat me." The room was still quiet, but the quality of the silence had changed. Before, it was the silence of men holding breath before impact. Now it was the silence of men recalibrating, pulling apart what they thought they knew and laying it next to what they had just witnessed. LaBelle nodded slowly. He would talk about this moment for the rest of his life, not to brag, not to diminish it, but because he said it was the day he understood something fundamental about what Bruce Lee actually was. He wasn't just fast, LaBelle would say, years later, to anyone who asked the right question. Fast is easy to understand. Fast is something you can see and measure. What Lee had was something else. He had already been everywhere you were about to go. You weren't fighting a man. You were fighting a man who had already lived the fight inside his own mind 1,000 times before you showed up. He paused. That's not speed. That's something closer to wisdom. The session ended without ceremony. There were no cameras, no announcements, no trophies. The 11 men who had been in that room dispersed into the Los Angeles afternoon, and for years, decades, what had happened in that gym existed only as a rumor, whispered between fighters who had heard it from someone who had heard it from someone who had actually been there. A story that spread the way all true things spread, slowly, quietly, without needing to announce itself. Because the truth doesn't need amplification, it just needs time. What Jean LaBelle later confirmed publicly, in interviews given long after Bruce Lee was gone, was that the session changed the way he thought about the ground game itself. Not the technique, the philosophy. He had always believed that the ground was his world, a closed kingdom where strikers came to lose. Bruce Lee had entered that kingdom without a passport and moved through it like someone who had drawn the maps himself. Not because he had been born with some supernatural gift, not because fate had smiled on him, because he had done the work in private, without announcement, without the need for anyone to know. This is the thing that gets lost in the legend of Bruce Lee. The man on screen, the explosive, blinding, mythic figure, was the result, not the truth. The truth was thousands of hours in rooms exactly like that gym in Culver City, drilling, studying, exposing the gaps in his own game and attacking them with the same ferocity he brought to everything else. He was not born a legend, he built one, brick by brick, technique by technique, question by question. And the most important questions were the ones he asked himself. Where am I vulnerable? What don't I know? Who is better than me in this area, and what can they teach me? Not because he was afraid of weakness, because he was obsessed with the truth. That afternoon in Culver City, a 2-time national judo champion had walked into a gym expecting to find the limit of Bruce Lee. He walked out having found something else entirely. Not a limit, a depth. A man who had quietly, privately, methodically made himself impossible to place in a box
because every time a box appeared, Bruce had already studied it, mapped it, trained inside it, and found the door. Only 11 people saw it. None of them ever forgot. And the man at the center of it said almost nothing, drove home in the late afternoon Los Angeles light, and went back to training, because the work was never finished. The work was never finished, and he knew it, and that was the whole point. That is the legacy. Not the films, not the myth, not the image frozen on a poster. The legacy is a man who refused to let silence be mistaken for emptiness, who let others build their assumptions, and then, quietly, completely, without mercy, revealed the truth. Because the most dangerous fighter in any room isn't the one who tells you what he knows, it's the one who already knows what you don't. If this story hit different, if you've never seen Bruce Lee quite like this before, subscribe right now. Every week we go deeper into the hidden moments, the real rooms, the private sessions that built the legends history forgot to film. The story doesn't end here. It never does.